church can play and does play. It's not only me as some prophet from the margins calling to the church to do this. I think the church is in fact doing that. Okay, I think that since the beginning of the problem, since the 1920s, the church has been speaking quite loudly and quite clearly about the issue of Palestine. And I think that that clarity of discourse is something that we as Catholics should be aware of. We should teach it, and we should adopt it as the discourse that we use. So, yeah, that's how I see my mission. I don't know if we're going to see a solution in a day, a year, a decade, a century, I don't know. But I certainly think, and again, I think that most of us who live in this situation, we don't think about solutions. What are the solutions? We think about how we're going to survive in the midst of this mess. And how are we going to contribute to allowing others to survive in the midst of this mess. But right now there is no real vision of a solution.
So, I want to explain my ignorance. Is there an optimal solution? I mean, what is the solution?
I think that language of solution is very limiting, okay? Because we sit down and we speculate about what are the possible logical solutions, and we know what they are. One state, Israel rules everything, throws away the Palestinians. One state, the Palestinians,
what do you mean by
the Arab countries. The language in Israel at present is, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. Palestinians are Arabs, and the Arabs have 22 countries.
But they don't want them, right? Will the Arab countries?
It's not, the first question is not whether they want them or not. The Palestinians don't want to leave. This is their land. Okay. This is their land. Okay. The other, of course, is, and this is the parallel discourse, okay, let it all be Palestine and ruled by the Arabs and throw the Jews away. Now, what is that? That's not saying kill all the Jews. It's not that kind of throwing them away. But they're Europeans. Why don't they just go back to Europe? Okay, so, that's also not very realistic. So then we come to two slightly more realistic, okay, not completely blind ideological visions. One is, cut the country in two. Okay, take the child, split it in two, and give half to each people, or half, or whatever it is. By the way, today we are not even talking about half. The international community is talking about 22% for Palestinians and 78% for Jews. Completely unfair, completely, but,
should not distribute resources according to those proportions, then, right? I mean,
sorry?
The resources are not distributed.
Yeah, that percentage does not correspond to the demographic reality. Palestinians and Israelis are half-half. Okay, Jews and Palestinians are half-half. By the way, we should never forget, of course, that today it's half-half. In 100 years ago, okay, just 100 years ago, Jews were 60,000 in the country. So, Palestinians are also facing this reality in a certain sense that Jews are foreigners. They've just arrived. Let them go back home. This is our land. Okay? But again, let's cut it in two, so that's one possibility. And the last possibility, and I think these are the logical possibilities, let's have one state where everybody's equal, democratic. You're Jewish, be Jewish at home. You're Muslim, be Muslim at home. You're Christian, be Christian at home. Let the state be a state for all its citizens. The vast majority of Christians, including me, feel most comfortable with that. But again, it's a pipe dream. We're a million years away from that. So I think, again, the language of solutions leads us to places of speculation that aren't real. The reality is we're living in a situation of war. How are we going to live in that situation? What is our role in a situation of war? Because it isn't realistic to think that the war's going to finish. Okay, so again, I come from South Africa, and I share this very, very often with Israelis and with Palestinians. In 1990, okay, in the year 1990, I don't think anybody in South Africa thought that apartheid was going to end. Okay, the end of the 80s were the worst period of apartheid. And I think that many were convinced, black people with absolute despair and white people with a sense of triumphalism, that this was a 1,000-year Reich. It would last forever. Within 5 years, apartheid was dismantled. So yes, but again, you had the privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela. I don't attribute always huge importance to one person, but I think he did introduce something that we need desperately here, and that is new language, new analysis, new imagination. And I think that our very tired, war conditioned imagination can't even think of what the solution is going to be. I think it's going to be different than anything we might imagine. Okay?
Thank you. Good.
Can you recommend a good way into it, let's say maybe an introductory book that would do a good job talking about the history of the church's relations to this part of the world?
So, what I really would say, and maybe this is not the easiest way to go, is to really take seriously what the popes have taught since Paul VI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that we have had 4 papal visits to this land: 64, 2000, 2009, 2014. 4 different popes. There has been an increasing momentum to the vision that the church is offering. And I think it's quite extraordinary. I'm a Jesuit, I can be very critical about the church, talk about women, talk about gays, talk about, I don't know what, church in Poland. I would not be saying, look at the church, what a wonderful example. But when it comes to developing the discourse about the Middle East, I think that something remarkable has been done. So, yeah, I think that there's something there to be looked at very, very closely. Of course, when we come back to the Christian reality on the ground, so we don't have a lot of Christians, okay? The percentage of Christians in Palestine, and when I say Palestine, I'm using it according to international law, meaning the 22% of the territory that is not recognized as part of the State of Israel, that should be Palestine. The Christians today are probably, we don't say this really openly and publish it, but they're probably less than 1% of the population, okay? Christians in the State of Israel, which is that 78% of internationally recognized territory that constitutes the state since 1948-49, are 2.4%. So we're a tiny marginal reality, but we have a very important presence in society that has nothing to do with our numbers. It has to do with our institutions. Okay? Bethlehem University, one of the very important institutions. Again, in Bethlehem, Christians today are 18% perhaps, 14% some people say, tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population of Bethlehem. And yet, we have this institution that is an oasis in the city of Bethlehem, and it's not the only one, probably the most important one. But there are other little oases that are hospitals and orphanages and homes for the elderly and schools. Our schools are an absolute treasure. And in those institutions, we can make our discourse real, incarnate. We don't always do it well. We're not even always aware that this should be our vocation, says me, Father David. But I think that we have there a real treasure. So, in the State of Israel, okay, in Palestine, the Christian population is pretty monolithic. Okay, that's a ridiculous thing to say if you know the ecumenical fracture, all the different confessions. So you have Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholics and Greek Catholics and Protestants and evangelicals. When I say monolithic, I think Christians live it this way. The vast majority are Palestinian Arabs. So they have a shared history. They might belong to all these different churches and they go to different churches on Sunday, but there is a sense of unity that is even growing, I would say. Growing because for many, many years, we would have left the evangelicals outside of the umbrella. Yesterday we've inaugurated this new network of theological and biblical institutes, and the evangelicals have taken the lead and we've all come on board. When you were at Bethlehem University, Bethlehem Bible College was the enemy.
Yes.
Okay? That's not true anymore. As sitting around the table were Father Iyad, who is the Dean of Humanities, and 2 of the leading personalities of Bethlehem Bible College. So I say there the Christians are kind of monolithic, even though they belong to all these churches. Belonging to the different churches is a richness, but there's a weakness because, as usual, the people are united and they're striding way ahead of church leadership that are lagging behind and still bickering among each other. Okay, but that aside, it's secondary. In the State of Israel, the situation is much more complicated. The Because in the State of Israel, the Christians are composed of three populations that have almost no contact among each other. And again, I'm not talking about Latin, Roman Catholics or Orthodox. That is absolutely secondary. What is essential in the State of Israel is that we have 120,000 Israelis who are Palestinian Arab Christians. Okay, so they're Christians who are Palestinian Arabs, and they form one kind of block of Christians who are second-class citizens, just like Muslims. The challenges that they face have a lot to do with discrimination and the war situation where a Palestinian would be regarded as an enemy, Muslim or Christian. We then have another 40,000 citizens of the State of Israel who are people like me. We are part of Jewish, Israeli, Hebrew-speaking society. And of course there's a wall between these Christians and these Christians, even if both are Roman Catholic or both are Greek Orthodox or both are Protestant. So those Christians, and it's not a small number, around 40,000, okay, are part and parcel of our churches, but their imagination, their discourse, their daily life is completely different from the Arabs who are Christian. They live like Jews. Okay, I'm an exception. Okay, there are not so many like me because I speak Arabic because of my Muslim family, so I'm very sensitized to the Palestinian Arabs. Okay, the vast majority of them, of course, would not be converts, but would be the children of mixed marriages, or for whatever reason they found themselves here and have become Israelis. In addition, we have a third group, which is not so present in Palestine because Palestine is a relatively poor economy. We are a very rich economy. We have another 150,000 Christians who live here full-time. They're not coming in for a visit and going away. There are 150,000 Christians who are either migrant workers, and we now have a third generation, the beginnings of a third generation of Christian migrant workers. Again, very difficult situation because in Israel it's almost impossible, if you're not Jewish, to become a citizen if you're coming from the outside. Okay? The country is defined as a Jewish state, which is very, very problematic for anybody who's not Jewish. Okay? Totally different to United States of America, where the state would be defined as a United Statesian state. Okay? And not Protestant or Catholic or Jewish or Hispanic or Irish or German. Okay? So here we have this thing with the Jewish state. So it's almost impossible to become citizens. We have third generation now, okay, starting to appear. And then we have another population that is in an even worse situation. And those are people who came into the State of Israel, the majority of them fleeing from Africa, who thought that they would be able to be refugees in Israel. But Israel doesn't give refugee status if you're not Jewish. So a very, very difficult situation. And these three important populations in the church, whichever church, including in the Roman Catholic Church, have almost no interactions with one another. So again, it's a very interesting and Christian situation in Israel today. Okay, a lot more monolithic in Palestine. We don't have, certainly not Hebrew-speaking Catholic or Christians, and certainly very few migrant worker Christians.
We've spoken with people from CRS, Caritas, who else, who have brought up to us this issue of U.S. funding now for, we talk about the institutional importance of the
The
church.
Latin Patriarchate, Sammy.
The U.S. aid that has been cut back. From your perspective, as people from the United States, is that the single most important issue right now, or immediate issue facing the institutional church and its ability to continue to exert this kind of influence in the region?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are myriad primary issues. Okay, not just one, but that's certainly one very, very important one. Again, it touches upon where is the church strongest in the church's mission, and that is the institutions. These institutions are very dependent on outside funding. Okay, Bethlehem University, like all of the others. So that the church is doing a work that is for the whole of society. By the way, I might add, Christians are not always happy with that.
Yes.
They are not always happy with the fact that the institutions are serving everybody. And in fact, even some of the, I did something for the board at Bethlehem University because there were even a problem with the board saying, why are we educating Muslims? Now, this needs to be said loud and clear. The church does not think like the individual Christian who has his self-interest, who says, why are we educating Muslims? Give me all the money. The church is thinking in terms which are very healthy, saying, if we want Christians to survive here, we need the society, the whole of society in which they live, to advance. Okay? So I am very, very, very insistent, and I do quite a lot of speaking. Didn't mention this, but for 12 years I was an Episcopal vicar in our diocese and insisted very, very much on the fact that our diocese needs to continue with this vision of our institutions serve society, not the Christians. Because there's no such thing as a Christian divorced from being either Palestinian Arab or Israeli, or like me, Israeli Hebrew speaking. Christian is one aspect of our identity. Creating a Christian identity in some kind of ghetto where we only take care of ourselves will lead to death. We will suffocate. Okay? Simply logistically, we're not enough. Okay?
Right.
So this is a very, very, very important aspect of our work, and it is certainly endangered by this drop in support from the outside, because we are so dependent on support from the outside. Okay? I think that there are other challenges that don't touch upon material well-being. And the most important of them is we need to educate our Christians, and we are, and we're struggling, and we're trying our best, but we need to do always better, that they belong here. Because many, many Christians think that everything will be better if they just leave. And so one of the big, big challenges is to convince those who dream about migration. Few can actually migrate. The world's not an easy place to, and of course they don't want to migrate to Rwanda. Okay, they want to migrate to New York or to Sydney. Okay, and it's not so easy. Thank God for us, it's not so easy. But we need to convince them that even thinking about migrating, which is already migrating in fact, because they withdraw from society, they stop contributing, is also going to be our death. Okay? We need Christians out there in the public domain speaking out strongly about what the issues are, how we see them. And by the way, this touches on a third very important challenge. Our Christians have become more and more anti-Muslim. Okay? We can understand why. We look around the Arab world, we see these radical Muslim groups, ISIS and ISIL and Qaeda and a million groups, and we sometimes, and we are more aware of it when they attack Christians than when most of the time they're attacking other Muslims. So we've become also very, very closed in our mentality. This is another huge, huge issue. If we do not work with others, we've already lost the battle. We're a tiny number of people. We are 50,000 people in Palestine. Okay? And in Israel, if we talk only about the Arabs who are Christians, we're 120,000 people. We need to build solid coalitions with people who are not Christian but who share our vision. And there are many of them out there among Muslims and among Jews. And so we need to emerge from the ghetto. These are just a few of the really big issues for Christians as we move ahead and try to envision. I was very happy yesterday at this meeting at the seminary, around the table. I was asked to share what I see as the big issues for educating in biblical and theological institutions. So I said, for me personally, thing number one, issue number one is reading the Bible. That's what I do. But reading the Bible from our context. Okay? The Bible in our context has become a source of absolute poison. Okay? Go to the Midwest, talk to any evangelical, and he will tell you immediately, this land, the land of Israel, was given by God to the Jews The Palestinians are the enemies of God, they should be wiped out. Okay, and this is from the Bible. So we need to find new ways to deal with the biblical text, which is not neutering the biblical text, but interpreting it correctly, so that it is a word of good news for everyone. Okay, one big challenge. And the second, I said, is another big challenge that I deal with. Since the year 2000, I have been asked to teach courses on Judaism in the Arab world. Okay, so first in the seminary, then at Bethlehem University, then at Dar el-Kalima. I've given courses in Lebanon and in Egypt, and it's a huge challenge because you say the word Jew in the Arab world today, and people think a murderous Israeli soldier. So what do you do with that? And you can't simply say, that's not true, that's anti-Semitism. No, because it's a part of reality. But the thing is to stretch their vision of reality so that it starts, with with, I don't know what, Abraham, and ends in hundreds of years' time where Jews and Arabs are going to find a way to live together. And everything that happened in between. Okay, and there were wonderful, wonderful periods of Jewish-Arab collaboration, coexistence, serene communal living. So to stretch that. So I said these are my two issues, and I was very happy that two of the evangelicals said, David, don't you think that one of our big issues is the way we speak about Muslims? And I said, I'm really happy it came from you. Yes, I think that that's probably even a bigger issue than the Bible. And actually these three words, if we are to do something together as Catholics, you in America and we here, it's these three words that need to be at the core. Okay? How do we use these words? Bible. Okay? The Bible has become a formula of death for Palestinians, Muslims and Christians. Arthur Balfour, the Balfour Declaration, the first time that a government recognized that the Jews have some right to this land, he was a Bible-bashing fundamentalist, like the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. By the way, what's so interesting, you seem to have read up on this, is that the only minister in 1917, when the British put into motion this disastrous dynamic that has led us to now, the only British minister who stood up and said, no, I oppose this with all my might, was Lord Montagu. He was Secretary for India. So, secondarily, he understood that what's at work here is colonialism. Primarily, and this is the primary reason why he was so opposed, he was Jewish. And he could not believe that Lord Balfour and David Lloyd George were saying, Jewish homeland in Palestine. He said, excuse me, my homeland is right here. I'm not going anywhere. Okay? Never been to Palestine, never want to go to Palestine. So Bible is really something vicious. Okay? Second, Jew. In the history of the church, we have used that word most of the time as something demonic. And it's exactly that has created this disaster. My ancestors never wanted to leave Germany. I dispute with Chaim Saadon that his ancestors wanted to leave Tunis. Okay? We were Germans, they were Tunisians, and we lived. Okay, it wasn't paradise, but that was our life. That life came to an end when, after centuries and centuries of Christian teaching about Jews, okay, it arrives at the 19th and 20th century with the development of modern anti-Semitism, and there is continuity there. There's difference, but also continuity. So we need to be very careful how we... And the third word is Muslim. Okay? Nowadays, we don't speak bad about Jews anymore. Most of us, most of the time. But we don't feel any compulsion not to speak bad about Muslims. And the Muslims have become the Jews. So we attribute, and remember, Jews were never angels. It's not like we spoke bad about them, but in fact they were angels. We spoke bad about them, and that was awful. And sometimes they were bad. Same with Muslims. Sometimes they're bad, but the way we speak about them, we've demonized and diabolized Muslims, and that kind of feeds into our Middle East. The way that we react and interact with the Middle East. And so I think that really, that's why I say language, we need to, and I think that again, going back to what should we read, I think reading some of what the church is saying about the Middle East, they're picking up on this, all of it. Okay? Our teaching of respect for Jews, our teaching of respect for Muslims, our search for justice, okay? Truth and peace in the Middle East, all linked together.
David,
Yes.
I had read a book about 2 or 3 years ago that was written by an Israeli newspaper reporter, and it was popular in the U.S. That's how I know it.
Ari Shavit,
Yes. And it
My
was
Promised
something
Land
like,
or something
this is
like
my
that.
country or something.
This is my promised land.
Right, right. And I think it's a very worthwhile book. Well, I don't know what your opinion is.
So I have a big problem.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's history.
I did the exercise, so I tell you what. I bought the book, crossed out the name of the author so that I wouldn't see it, and read the book and said, not bad, not bad. But knowing the person, having gone to university with him, he is a slime bag second to none.
How do you feel about it?
You'll understand why I say that if you put his name into Google and you see what comes up.
But it's a worthwhile book, I thought.
He's a very, very intelligent man. He's a real ideologue. Okay, so he has his ideology, but he wants to present himself as very open and liberal. So the result is something fascinating. I think it's a good book to read. His name is Ari Shavit. Okay, I would say that if you read that by moral obligation, you should read Edward Said, who was teaching in New York, the question of Palestine, or any other, because reading an Israeli book that is coming out of Israeli ideology, I would say that Ari Shavit and Edward Said, I don't think Edward Said was a slime bag. He did not, what is the word, molest women. Okay? So, so don't buy the book, because you might get some of the money. Try to find it second hand or steal it from the bookstore. Get it on the library or pirated versions on the internet.
Yeah, I
So it's
read
his
it from the
personal
library.
behavior
That makes
No,
sense.
no, it's also his political
ideology.
behavior.
He's
No,
an
no, he's
Israeli,
political
basically talking about all the issues that Israel has done, and he goes through the whole history, all the way back.
Very
from the
selectively.
Zionists.
It's not a history book. It's a very impressionistic take on Israeli society.
Correct.
Okay, we're going back in history as well. But he's extremely well educated. He comes from an incredibly aristocratic Jewish family. His father, unlike his father, his great-grandfather, who was a contemporary and acquaintance of Lord Montagu, was somebody who was willing to think about perhaps this is our land. Okay, and his grandfather was one of our chief justices at a certain point. So he's coming from a very, very privileged background. And with that privileged background, he has an excellent education. And,
What was the reception in Israel of the book?
the book was not read in Israel.
It
Okay,
was not.
he is known in Israel as a journalist, and he was thrown out of the newspaper where he worked, Haaretz. Some of you were reading Haaretz. He worked for Haaretz. He was thrown out of Haaretz when this American journalist accused him of mauling her.
Right.
He then, okay, I say this, is this character assassination?
No.
Well, no. The president of the board says no. He then he's a very intelligent man, so he put together an interview that was published in the same newspaper that had thrown him out, with a feminist professor of law, in which he made this incredible confession of what he had done and how sorry he was. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to come back. They're going to believe this. And then 2 days later, his daughter is a lesbian, and his daughter's lesbian partner came out in the newspapers and said, I just read this confession and he mauled me. So he then disappeared, and I think for a much longer time. So again, I bring it up because yes, the book is very seductive. It's seductive with its intelligence, and he is very intelligent. But there is a lie running through that book, which is, this is the liberal, open-minded white man who is trying to preserve the empire, knowing that he needs the support of an outside world that will say, wow, how sophisticated. I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with these horrible stories we're talking about. In this house lived Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini. Cardinal Martini was the Archbishop of Milan, a wonderful man, a really aristocratic man. He also supported greatly Bethlehem University. But he was foundationally, because of who he was, he had lived through the Second World War, he had worked as Archbishop for so long with the Jewish community to get over the trauma of the Shoah, and then when he retired he moved to Jerusalem. And then I tried to get him to open his heart to the Palestinians. And that was not hard, but he was always, his gut reactions were always pro-Israel. So I give you one example. One day I came and brought him a report of B'Tselem. I was on the board of B'Tselem, which is a human rights organization that documents what the Israeli army is doing. So I said, Eminenza, read this. And I'm standing over his shoulder as he goes through, and it's real horror stories of what the army has done in the last few months against the Palestinian people. And he finishes, closes, looks up at me and he says, how can you say that this people is not a great people? Look at how they document their own wrongdoing.
Holy God!
So, there's a truth there.
There's truth there, yes.
Shavit's writing, there is a truth, but it's a little bit perverted. It's a little bit perverted because what he's basically doing is creating for you and for everyone else this image of the Israeli, Ari Shavit. Look how understanding he is. But what does he vote? What does he do in the country to change the reality? So, I prefer less eloquent people who are really out there at the barricades fighting for justice.
Well,
Praying the rosary at the
I
wall.
live in New York City. I live in a building that's, 75-80% Jewish. There are people who, an older man who said he refused to read the New York Times because they're anti-Israel. So that's the state that you're dealing with. So I thought this was at least a little more.
And I'm sure that Ari Shavit would have gotten a lot of flack from many Jews who said, you're washing out dirty laundry in public.
And that was the reaction.
But at the same time reading it from the point of view of reality, okay? Taking that book and reading it behind the wall, on the other side of the wall, you say, come on, this is Disneyland. Okay, this
Father
is...
David, tell me a document you read these days that is really totally truthful.
It's not a question of totally truthful, it's the question of, does this bring me into reality or distance me from reality? So I think you're right, in the United States, a book like Ari Shavit's can be read with benefit, okay? But Ari Shavit doesn't live in the United States, he lives here. So I would expect of him, we have the most marvelous Israeli journalists, okay? Gidon Levy, he's a prophet. He's a journalist who writes in Haaretz. He is a prophetic figure, okay? Now another one, absolutely wonderful woman who also writes, Israeli, spent time in Ramallah, spent time in Gaza. Her name for an instant has gone out of my mind. These are transformative people, okay? And I'm not saying they're giving us the whole truth. They are writing impressionistic articles like his, but they are really touching on the pain of the other. I didn't feel that with
I totally
Ari.
understand. We have no access
I
to
feel
that.
with Ari that he's thinking of how can I appear open and moderate. Right?
Levy.
Well, it would be helpful to have more information.
VI.
We have.
There is a way, there is a wonderful website that gathers together Palestinian and Israelis who are writing on the situation and from a perspective that I would say is the perspective of creating a new language. The website is very simple, it's called
If
972. In other words, you write the numbers 972 and up will come the website, And
Yeah,
it's a
that's-
news website.
It's the area code. It's a
the
telephone area
of
code.
Israel,
Okay.
972. But it's a website that collects together very, very different subjects, all to do with our politics, society and economy, and written by Palestinians and Israelis. And it's there in a place like that, okay, which will never become the main media source of any country, but it's a place like that where I think the pioneers are really forging this new language that is critical, that is looking at our history and saying, okay, where has it brought us? How
Mm.
can we change the vector? That is,
David, when you mentioned the church documents, I had never thought of that before, you know, even those four popes who have come here. When you said that, I had a flash in my head about what Benedict said. When Benedict arrived in Israel, and what he said was something about friends can talk to friends with a level of honesty. And he spoke very clearly about
the wall.
Yeah. And he said the same, and when he arrived in Palestine, he said the same thing to Abu Mazen. Really gut-wrenching truth to both sides. Yeah.
If you like,
We should get those documents.
this is a publicity break. If you like, and I can do it through Jack, I wrote an article about the visit of Benedict
Mm.
and another article about the visit of Francis.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that I wrote in fact a much earlier article, but it's not. I don't think it's worth plodding through about John Paul II's visit. But the Benedict article and the Francis article are really an attempt to show
Mm.
that there is a teaching here that is taking form
Mm.
and that offers us horizons that are opening before us to understand what's going on in the country. So if you want, I can send you those.
Please do.
documents.
Yeah, they-
Please
They
do.
were published in a Jesuit British journal. They were published in Arabic in Father Rafiq Khouri's journal,
Mhm.
Al-Liqa. They were written for him. He asked them, but then afterwards they were published in English in a Jesuit journal in Britain.
Wonderful.
But I can send them to you.
Please.
I've done quite a bit of writing on this because I find it fascinating. Okay, and
Mm.
the book that came out of Fordham, the Land, the Bible and History, is an attempt also to examine
Mhm.
what do we say? And I'm sure that in the United States you're up against this all the time, and we're up against that and the other. What do you say to your Jewish friends who say, but don't you believe that God gave us the land? And this is, it's kind of, they think it's absolutely normal. And then we meet Muslims and they say, how can you side with colonialism and imperialism? You're the church. And so the book is an attempt to explore what do we have to say? What can we say as Christians based upon our own reading of the biblical texts, our understanding of history, which includes our disastrous treatment of Jews too often, and our equally disastrous treatment of Muslims too often. And then coming into the whole question of justice and peace, what can we say? First, of course, we need to be clear. What do we want?
Mm.
Okay, what is it that we want in this land? So,
I would say the vast majority of my Jewish friends in my age group, and maybe 10 years younger, believe the same as you did as a child. You talked about in your group. They will go through all the processes and everything else, but they're really just not connected. They don't.
connected to what?
They're Jewish. They're
No.
Jewish.
Listen, the statistic, the Pew report, is that something that
Right.
you
Mhm.
look
Oh,
at
yeah.
and think of as...
Yeah.
I read the Pew report about 5 years ago. The Pew report published really startling statistics on religious belief and practice in the world, according to different religions. So the kind of minor surprise was that according to their statistics, 76% of Christians in the world, okay, this is not the United States, this is not Europe, this is the whole world, 76% take their religion seriously. 72% of Muslims, what I found interesting was that Muslims are less than Christians, but almost the same, 72%. 37% of Jews.
Mm.
Jews are incredibly secularized, and the reasons for that are absolutely clear. When Jews who were marginalized in society finally had the possibility to become fully part of society. They worked and became agents and remain agents till now for secularism. Because under religion, they're always going to be marginalized and discriminated
Correct.
against. They wanted a society with no religion, and they were prepared to sacrifice their own religion, saying, we don't want you to be religious, and we're not going to be religious. And in America, of course, you see that, it's very clear. But also you saw it in Europe, even before the Second World War.
About right here.
But there is another kind of Jewish religion which has nothing to do with God. And it's probably the two things that the vast majority of Jews have in common. Okay? And that is, don't you dare speak about the state of Israel. So you can say anything you want about God or anything you want about Judaism, make all the jokes you want. Don't criticize the state of Israel. That's become a god. And there's another one, and that is our long lecture this morning, the Shoah. These two things have become what defines what it means to be Jewish today. And it's a big worry for the Jewish people, because this is not going to go on forever. You know, God is a big thing, can hold you together for a long time. But two historical events, separated by 3 years, the Shoah and the State of Israel, have become the absolute palpitating center of Jewish sentiment. So yeah, your Jewish friends, your age, might not have any religious practice, but go back and tell them, you know what, I saw the Israeli soldiers doing terrible things in Palestine, and see how they react. Okay? And write me a little email. and it's almost on the level of saying, you have touched God, okay? It's impossible to critique. Thanks be to God, among US Jews today, there is a fringe that is extremely educated, very critical thinking, that has realized more and is realizing more and more that where we have gone as a people, as the Jewish people since the Holocaust, is not a healthy place. Okay? Somebody said here the name Ellis is a Jewish name.
Yeah.
You said that to me, no? So there is a Jewish theologian in the United States, Mark Ellis. He is one of the most strong critiques of the state of Israel and Zionism.
Yes.
But you know what happened to him? He had
lost
a
his
job
tenure.
in a Catholic university.
Oh, yes.
When he
Yeah.
published his
Yes.
books,
Lost
the
his
Jewish
tenure.
community came
Yeah.
and they stood outside the university. They said, we will not leave until he's found.
Yep.
Okay? He is not allowed into the state of Israel anymore.
I think it was Chicago area.
Okay?
What university
Was it?
I don't remember.
I think it was someplace in Chicago. I think.
Chicago. There is another, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Braverman, another extremely courageous person who is speaking out with no compunction about what is going on here, the type of colonialism that we are practicing as Jews. Judith Butler, okay, a philosopher, writing, the first, by the way, one of my heroes, because she saw this so early, was Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt
Right.
was a prophet, because Hannah Arendt started as a Zionist, and everything led her to be a Zionist. She experienced the persecution in Nazi Germany. She became a refugee in the United States. She signed many, many different petitions in the name of Zionism, and then she started to understand. And Hannah Arendt, at the end of her life, she wrote the most terrifying book in 1964, 1965 that documented the Eichmann trial. As she realized what the Israelis were actually doing with Eichmann. That they were turning Eichmann into the raison d'être for the state of Israel. Yeah? And she was absolutely clairvoyant. Okay? By the way, Martin Buber, okay, the great Jewish philosopher who lived in Israel, okay, after 1948, he also began to see what was going on. Thank God he died before 1967. He didn't see what went on in the Palestinian territories. So we have a slew of Jews who understand and are horrified. But the average Jew still lives according to these myths. Okay, and these myths are Auschwitz, and because everything's Auschwitz, the only alternative is a strong non-dialogic state of Israel. And it will be the end of all of us.
Hannah taught at the new school.
Yes.
She lived in the village.
Yeah.
I read the.
And
There
they
is
read
a
her,
wonderful movie that
they
came
read her
out
at St.
in
John's.
2012 in German.
they read her at St.
Did you
John's.
see that?
No, I didn't.
It's called, I think, Hannah Arendt. It's an acted movie with a Polish actor. It is a masterpiece.
No,
And
she-
I had read the Eichmann trial many years ago, but after the movie I read it again.
Yeah, no, it's
Very.
Yeah, it was Baylor?
I know.
Baylor.
Baylor?
Mark Ellis, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes,
just
yes.
Protestant.
He was like
That's a Baptist.
No, but I think he went to Baylor after he was thrown out of Loyola, maybe.
Loyola Chicago?
He was at Marquette. maybe.
Marquette. But Marquette is a Catholic
The law.
university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, so it's not Catholic.
That was an, I gotcha.
Yeah, for sure, your article about the Pope's visits would be very,
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I'll send them to you.
yeah, it'd be great.
It's the Benedict visit and the Francis visit, and it gives. I hope I'm choosing some of the most important things that were said and the orientations of their
Mhm.
visit.
Mhm.
Benedict's visit followed John Paul's. But Benedict's was a very courageous visit because he was German,
Yes,
and that he allowed himself, or even obligated himself, to say the truth.
yes,
Okay, and to say that truth among Arabs
exactly,
and among Israelis.
both sides.
And then Francis, his visit also was a
Mhm.
moment of real clarity and light.
Mhm.
And I think that really, in terms of the discourse about our conflict, we have a lot to adopt and learn from what the Church has been enunciating.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
This was really
Amazing.
Yeah,